Hello and welcome back to Tabletop with Kevin. Today, we have a short tutorial on how to speed paint your Ork Boyz using contrast paints and make them tabletop ready in no time. Now I'll be showing you two methods on how to create Ork skin. There are pros and cons and I'll be leaving you to decide how you want to do this. Now if you liked what you see, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to see more of these kind of videos, hit that notification button and do let me know what you'd like to see next. Now this video is all about speed painting with contrast paints, so I won't be touching on highlights at all. For primer, I'm using Citadel Grey Seer Primer to give the boys a nice bright base coat for the contrast colors to shine through. Now I have two models here to show you on the two methods of creating Ork skins. The first method is by far the simplest, which is to use contrast paint Ork Flesh. Now before you open up, don't forget to put some blue tack below so that it doesn't spill. Now Ork Flesh is quite a dark green to use, but the good point about it is that you can use it right out of the pot and you only need to use it one coat. Now try not to overload your brush too much when applying, and don't be so concerned about splashing it a bit too much. Now just drag it away if you apply a bit too much onto the skin. Also, do try to be a bit more accurate when you're painting near to the other parts, such as like the leather straps, the bones, and the teeth. Now because contrast is a bit translucent compared to other base or layer paints, now if you made a mistake, don't worry about it. You can actually use the same color as the primer, in this case which is Grey Seer. You can use it to paint over the parts which you make mistakes, then after that you can use the other contrast paints over it. Now you don't want to leave the Ork Flesh green color on before you paint on the teeth, where you'll be using a different color. The reason why is because that you may be able to still see the green color, and you'll create a very funny patch when you paint over it with another contrast color. Now that your Ork skin has been completed, do make sure it's completely dry before you apply the other contrast paints. Now is also the time that if you've made any mistakes, don't forget to use the Grey Seer layer paints for you to do any touch up of any mistakes. While in the meantime, I'm going to show you how to make the other Ork Flesh. So the second method of creating the Ork skin will give you a much lighter skin color, and it starts with Plaguebearer Flesh. Once it dries, I'll be using a shade of Biel-Tan green over it. For this method, I think the best results is to use a very thin coat of Plaguebearer Flesh. And when I say thin, you have to drag it away from any recesses if they start to pull, and not just on the recesses but on the flat areas of the skin as well. At the same time, we're looking for even coverage everywhere. Now once you've completed applying the Plaguebearer Flesh, remember to let it dry completely before we apply the next shade of Biel-Tan green. Now that the Plaguebearer Flesh is applied and dry completely, we'll be applying the shade Biel-Tan green. Now this is where the magic happens. After you apply the Biel-Tan green all over, you can actually be a bit more liberal over here with your amount, and you can let it start to pool in all the recesses, like a regular shade. Now the trick over here is to actually cover all the yellowish parts which is left over by the Plaguebearer Flesh. Now then you have to slowly drag the shade all over the flat areas especially. Now after drying, if some of the yellowish portions are still showing, you can actually use a very thin layer of the shade again and cover it up. Now that you've completed applying the Biel-Tan green shade, leave it to dry, and later you will see that the skin is a much lighter tone. Now we can start to paint with some clan colors. And for my clan colors, I'll be using the Evil Sun's color as my base. So I'll be using the contrast paint Flesh Terror Red to give that deep and rich red color. I'll be applying the paint onto the shoulder pads, the loincloth, and perhaps even part of the gun. You can start to apply similar concepts if you're using the other clan colors such as a black base for the Goths, a yellow base for the Bad Moons, and perhaps even a blue and white base for the Death Skulls. However, feel free to use whatever color suits you. Now as you see here, I'm avoiding the metallic parts and the leather portions. For the metallic parts, I am not so worried, and I'll explain why later in the video. Now as you can see right here that I've actually painted on both models on the different orc skin colors for your reference. Once I've completed with the clan colors, I'll be moving on to the other parts, which are like the leather straps, the pants, the boots, and the metallic parts as well. For the leather portions, I'll be using the contrast paint Snakebite leather. Now as you apply the Snakebite leather, just be a little bit careful so that you don't spill it over to the other colors. Now because your base coat is gracier, you may want to apply 2 thin coats so that there's a proper coverage for the Snakebite leather. For the wooden portions, I'll be using Wyldwood to give that dark brownish color onto those wooden handles. Now because you're using a very dark color, just take your time and just be careful that you don't spill it over to the other colors. Now if you made any mistakes, you can always wet your brush, dry it on a tissue paper or paper towel, and use it to dab away the mistake that you made. Now for the metallic portions, you can always try to use contrast paints such as Basilicanum Grey and Aggaros Dunes, whereas you actually have to apply a very thin coat on it to make it look metallic. However, for me, I do find that it doesn't stand out as much, so in this case, or rather what I like to do is that I like to use Leadbelcher and Balthasar gold for all the metallic parts. And as always, for the silver parts, don't forget to use Nuln Oil as your shade, and Agrax Earthshade for the Balthasar gold parts. So in this case, I'll be using Basilicanum Grey for the boots of the orcs. Right here, you don't have to be so precise, you can just whack it and spread it. The reason why I say that is because that we'll be using black for the pants, so in case you might have made some mistakes by spilling it over to the pants area, you can cover it up with the black color contrast paint. Now I'll be using black Templar to create the black color pants. Now just be careful as you move closer towards the leather belts and the loincloth. Again, if you made any mistakes, clean your brush, dry it off on a paper towel, and quickly soak it away. As you move on to the metallic parts, I would like to take the Leadbelcher and mix it together with water, a 1:1 ratio, so that I can thin out the paints. Now as I mentioned earlier that if you might have accidentally spilled some red or other colors onto the metallic parts, you don't have to worry because the layer paints or the base paints tend to be really opaque. So you can definitely cover up all the parts that you may have made a mistake on. Now because you have other colors applied really near to the metallic areas, do take your time to just slowly paint over them. Next up, I'm using Balthasar gold to break up all the silver parts to give it a very nice contrast of colors. I tend to use a 1:1 ratio of the paint to water so that I can thin it out before I paint them. Lastly, we'll be using the contrast paint Skeleton Horde to apply onto the teeth and little bones that you can find all over the miniature. Now if you made any mistakes, now is the time for you to use the Gracia layer paint over them so that you don't see any of the other colors coming out. Now take your time on these portions because the teeth portions and the bones tend to be really small. Well, there you have it, your Ork Boy in almost all contrast paints. Now I'll leave it up to you to decide which Ork skin you like best. Personally, I prefer the lighter skin color as they look brighter on the tabletop. I hope you liked this painting tutorial and I hope it helps you to quickly paint your Horde of boys. Do also leave us a comment on which Ork skin you prefer, the lighter or the darker one. And finally, do remember to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you all and I'll see you next time.